So in this particular lecture, let's go ahead and let's actually start designing the navigation bar for our website. So the first thing which needs to be done is you need to go to base.html, and here is where we are going to set up the nav bar. And once we have the nav bar, then we are going to have these login and logout buttons in there. So for now, let's go ahead and let's go inside the body tag and let's actually create a nav bar. So I'll create a nav tag here, which is going to be our entire navigation bar. And in this particular nav bar, let's create a main div. So this div is going to be the container for all the elements which we have. So the way in which we are going to design this nav bar is that we are actually going to go ahead, and on the left hand side we want the logo, and on the right hand side we want the items of the menu. So this is going to be the outer container, which is this div, and inside this div we are going to have two divs. So one div is going to be for the website logo and the other div is going to be for the navigation items. So let's create that. So I'll add a comment here which would say something like website logo. So here I would say website logo, and then similarly I would add another comment here which is going to say something like website items. And here let's create a div for the website logo. So this div is going to be a container for the website logo, and here this entire website logo is going to be wrapped up in a ahref tag. So I'll create an ahref tag here, and in that particular ahref tag, first of all we are going to have an image, and this image is going to be something which we are going to add later, but for now we also need to add the name of that particular website as well. So here, in order to add a name, as we want to add the name right next to this particular image, I would use a span tag, and this span tag is going to have our website name. Let's say we name this thing as photo app, which is the name of our app. If I go back here to the browser, let's see what do we get. So if I hit refresh, so as you can see, if I hit refresh, I get photo app right up over here. So that means we have added this thing. Now let's also add a logo as well, which is the actual image. Now in order to get a logo for your website, what you could do is you could simply go to a website called as Icon Finder. So you could simply go to Google, search for Icon Finder, click on the first link which pops up, and this website gives you free images which you could use for adding into your website. So you could search for icons here. So let's say I want an icon for a social media website. So I could search for an icon like Instagram. We won't be using the Instagram logo here, but we will be using a similar looking icon like this one. So this is free to use. You could select that, and then you could download this particular icon as a PNG image. So I'll simply click here, and once this particular icon is downloaded, you could simply drag it and drop it at whatever location which you want. So here right inside the static folder, we have the users folder right up over here, but in this users folder, let's say I want to create another folder for our images. So I'll create a new folder in there called as images, and let's say I want to use this or paste this image in there. I will simply drag it and drop it inside this folder. And now let's change this particular name to something else. So let's say I rename this thing to social.png, and as you can have it, we now have an app over there. So if I go back to VS Code, now in order to add this icon right up over here to this particular image tag, I simply have to edit the source attribute here. So inside the source, as we are using an image from static, I would add a static tag, and then the path for the images users/images/social.png, which is the name of the image. Now as soon as we add that, and if I go back here, hit refresh, as you can see, now the icon is added up right up over here. But if you take a look at this, the icon is much bigger, and let's say if you want to reduce the size of this particular icon. So for that very reason, what you could do is that you could add a CSS. But now as we are using Tailwind, instead of writing CSS to set up the size of this image, instead you could use the built-in classes. So here I would say class, and then I could say I want the height of this thing to be certain number of pixels. So here we have an H8 class. So if I say H8, it's actually going to set up this particular image to be of a certain size. And in order to know the exact size for this tag, you could actually visit Tailwind's official website. So you could go to Tailwind's official website by searching for Tailwind, and here you could search for anything which you want. So let's say if I want to add width and height for a certain HTML element, I could search for height. And if I go ahead, search for height, now here it will show me the different kinds of classes which I need to use to set a particular height. So H8 over here basically means that you use a height which is 32 pixels or 2 rems. So here we have set up H8, and similar class is used for width as well. So if I want to set the width to 32 pixels, I would say W-8. Now as soon as I do that, and if I go back to the browser, if I go to localhost, hit refresh, as you can see now this particular image icon now has a size of 32 pixels. Now similar to setting up the width and height of a particular HTML element, you could also set up the other properties of a particular element as well, like you could set certain items to be flex, you could center certain items, so on and so forth. And also make sure that you are into version 2.2.19 while making these searches, and you could search for any property here. So we are not going to search each and every property. Instead, I am directly going to add them in order to save time. But if you want to explore Tailwind, you could do that over here. Okay, so now let's get back styling our image here. So now once we have added the styling to this, now you'll be able to see that we have these two things and they are right on top of each other. But let's say if I want to make them to the side, I could actually go ahead, and for this ahref which I have, I could actually add a class and I could make it flex. So as soon as I make it flex and hit refresh, now these things are on the side of each other, and this is what exactly we want. And also let's go ahead and let's increase the font of this thing a little bit. So let's make this font as a little bit bolder, and in order to make that font bold, you simply have to add a couple of classes to this span. So if I want to make the font bold, you could simply again go back to Tailwind and you could say font bold, or you could search for font weight more specifically, and it will give you the different classes which you could use to set up the font. So if you want to set the font weight to 600, you could use a Tailwind class which is font dash semi bold. So here I would say font slash semi bold. Save this. If I go back here, now as you can see, the font is now a little bit darker. Now you'll be able to see that the text over here is a little bit smaller. So to increase the size of the text, there's a class which is text-lg. If I add that, now the text is a little bit larger. And let's say if you want to set the text color, so right now the color is about black, and let's say you want to set it to some grayer shade, you could do that as well. So for that you simply have to add a class text gray with a shade of 500. If you do that and hit refresh, as you can see now this has a much lighter shade. And now let's add a couple of more properties to this logo. So as you can see, the logo is not separated from this text, so we want some margin on the right. So I could go to Tailwind, I could search for margin right, or I could simply search for margin. And here as you can see, it will also give you the different options if you only want to set the margin for different sides. So for example, if I search for right on this page, if you want to add margin on the x-axis or margin on the right, you say mx dash the margin which you want to add. So here I would say I want to add a margin of 2 to this particular image on the right. So here inside the class, I would say mr-2. If I go back, hit refresh, now as you can see, we have margin on the right hand side. So this is how Tailwind works. Now we have the left side of this nav ready. Now let's set up the nav items inside another div. So I'll create another div here, and this div is going to be for website items. Now for the website items right up over here, we are going to require links. So here I would create certain links. Let's say this is going to be link 1. Let's also add another link like link 2. So once I add them, again we have the same thing, that is these two things are aligned on top of each other and not next to each other. That means the container for these two divs is this main div right here, and we need to set its class to flex. As soon as I do that and hit refresh, now as you can see, it's now set right next to each other. So now we have added a couple of elements here, but we also need to add styling to this ahref as well. So first of all, let's add some padding for this particular element, which is the link element. So here I'll add a class, and we could start adding some Tailwind classes in here. So I want the padding on the y-axis to be 4, so I'll say py4. I want the padding on the x-axis to be 2, so px2. And I want the text of this thing to be gray with a shade of 500. So I would say text gray with a shade of 500. I want the font to be semi-bold. So font is semi-bold. I could go back, hit refresh, and now as you can see, we have that right up over here. Now we will continue styling this particular navbar in the upcoming lecture, where we are going to add a couple of more CSS classes to all the elements which we have. So let's go ahead and let's learn how to do that in the next one.